Yeah.
Over to you.
I suppose when it comes to like knowing, Greg, it's like it's all inferred, isn't it? Like I can like know or feel happy, but it's never ever something you have and possess. And this is the problem I find with it, because that model of like let's just call it what it is, the cognitive load theory model is a possession model. It's an acquiring, and you see that in the words and the language. And there's a narrative here, and it's not anything that's a secret. Like that is the framework that is underpinning the whole education. That is the framework that we're going with. So they have to make, and I appreciate as well that Ofsted have, if you're a research reviewer, you have to make it fit. But what you're seeing then is a pushback from every subject, and that's what I'm starting to realise. It's not just from PE. You're seeing maths. The maths review got absolutely hammered. There's an amazing blog come out the other day from the English one about how it's so we're all having the same issue as subjects practitioners, that this is too narrow. So going back to your question, do you have to know how you feel? I just don't think we can put markers down and say, okay, we're going to talk to you now and we're going to question you, how do you feel, and then we're going to use that as an assessment at a point, because at any one moment someone's going to change how they feel. The next lesson they're going to come back and change. And that's not to say you shouldn't reflect and talk about it. I do think that's important. I think reflection is key, and I think allowing that space in PE is unbelievable, because otherwise you just carry on doing, and there isn't that time. But I think once we start to like see knowing as like a commodity, so that means that we have to assess it and we have to collate it and we have to, then it becomes like there has to be a way of knowing. And I think the point I'm always keen on is that there is multiple ways of knowing, of feeling, and we won't know how people feel. We can never guess and we can make inference, and even people might not know. There's a really interesting point about tacit knowledge. Like you can't explain it. Like when you do something or you feel a certain way, like or you can't always explain it and verbalize it. So I think there's sometimes in education, because we can't measure it, then we should find ways to measure it, or because it's really hard to to pin down, then we should avoid it. But actually that's what makes us human, that bit in the middle where it's really nuanced and it's like I can't really explain it, but I've got a feeling. Everyone's had that in their life, and everyone has that throughout their life. So why do we need to suppress it for PE? But I always think, I said it before a couple of years, I don't think we need to assess PE. I don't think we need to assess anything in PE. I think if we didn't assess, we'd be absolutely fine. I don't think that the walls would fall apart. I really don't think that would happen. I think assessment in its common form, where it is narrow, where it's misled sometimes in terms of like assessing physical skills as a determinant of being physically educated, I think that actually has done more harm potentially than not assessing at all, and actually having a pedagogy that allows people to explore and to learn and to enjoy movement. And I know you hate the word fun, and I'm not saying make the lesson fun and make PE fun, but engagement in enjoyment doesn't have to be just in fun. Like I went to the golf course the other day, Greg. I was absolutely terrible. I wanted to walk off, but I was engaged because I'm engaged for my own purposes, and it's mine. That's what I think was missing. It's my knowledge that I'm developing. It's my experience that I'm developing, and I just think the narrow view of it's always going to take that away. It's someone else's. And then what happens when we leave? If we leave the students, then what are they left with? Now, of course, people who've got agency, they're always going to do what they want to do, and even when they leave us, it's not like we have that much of an impact. We have 2 hours of PE a week. But with the time we have, can we just use it a little bit better so people feel like they are a little bit in control and have some agency in deciding where they go with their movement? And this is the last thing I'll say is like PE is different for me. And I hear people say PE is not different, it's still education. But I don't know any other subject where you're trying to learn something using your body and someone can come and disrupt your body and physically hurt you to stop you from learning. Like if I'm trying to learn how to use Pythagoras theorem, no one's going to come up and grab me by the waist and wrestle me to the floor. So the environment has a massive impact on the way I learn and the experiences I have. So, and that's why I think it's important to include that in any curriculum and think about that before you start planning a curriculum.
Well, there's a lot there. Some really interesting stuff there, Mo. And just, I'm not going to overthink it. So just going to pick up on a couple of themes. Otherwise, it will be a very stilted conversation. So I'm really interested. I'm going to pick up on what you said about assessment and would the world fall apart if we didn't assess. And the vast majority of primary practitioners and pre-service teachers I work with, when we talk about how do you assess, what do you assess in primary, the answer is we don't. And I'm going to push back a little bit, and by all means, push back again. I think if there's no assessment, there's no subject, and there's no way of looking at progress. Now, I also think, and this is where I agree with you more, that if we look at assessment as a neutral term, or even something that needs to be done, I see it very similarly, and I'd analyse it similarly to what you said about sport. Sport has had a bad press in lots of circles. How often do we hear physical educators talk about it's not sport, as if that's a terrible thing? And don't get me wrong, I absolutely get the critique of presenting physical education as sport when it is bad sport. And bad sport, I mean, when it is structured around one, adult sport, and two, often highly commercialized elite adult sport. Now, that's really different to youth sport. And you'll know as well as I do that, and in fact, you touched upon it, age appropriate, constraints-led versions of sport, which the national governing bodies have invested really heavily in. You mentioned cricket and wouldn't have half the rules. Well, the ECB have got rid of most of those rules and have created a whole load of new rules with their cricket for children, which is a terrific, really inclusive, really progressive approach, really child-centered approach to cricket, as has rugby, as has football, as has tennis. So I see some of the best practice for retention in physical activity, for creating really optimal experiences for young people. I see some of the best practice on the national governing body websites and at sports coaches that are very good at doing that. So sport's not good or bad. It's just it depends how it's used. Assessment's not good or bad. So coming back to the assessment of PE, which I think relates to the knowledge conversation, if we arrive at more useful knowledge, and I know that that's contentious, what is useful knowledge? If we arrive at the young person knowing how they operate in that world, like you going to the golf club, and I know what the barriers are I'm going to be experiencing. I know that this is a really technical game. It's going to really test my patience. How do I respond to that? That whole psycho-affective social domain. That's going to drive retention. That's going to drive engagement. And as you quite rightly pointed out, that golf experience is not fun. In fact, it's pretty horrible, but that's the course that you've opted into, and you're probably going to get hooked into that for the next 20 years. And yeah, I grew up my dad was a very keen golfer at the time, and so yeah, it's not the easiest game on any level.
But I'm obsessed with it, Greg. I'm obsessed with it. Going through that, I'm obsessed with it.
Yeah, it is. But I'm picking that. Like, what's hooking you in? So there was probably a bit of a ramble there, but so I'm saying, I guess what I'm trying to say is, if we highlight what good knowledge is. So if you go back to the paper, and I know you've got a couple of papers planned coming out of it, how does that lead into how we can do PE, how we can present PE in a more productive, progressive way, so that more kids achieve that goal that you mentioned of doing this stuff? As you know, like, we invest heavily in our time. All of our work is around collecting the data, not to see what people know, but what their behavior is. So we think that the ultimate goal is that the kids are actually doing this. And this goes back to my conversation with Hannah Midder. Like, are we worried if they're doing it? If they're doing it, does it matter what knowledge that's propped up on? And I think there's probably loads of knowledge there, but it's just like you said, there's a lot of tacit knowledge. I've probably rambled on, so pick up on
No,
any
you have, because
aspect
you
on
kind
that.
of, yeah, no, but you, sorry, you haven't rambled on, but I do get what you're saying. And I think my kind of like radical flippant, like, we don't need assessment. I think what you said is really key. It's like, in its current form, with the rocky road that we're on in PE, like, it can do more harm than it does good. And that's what I mean. If you start afresh from a different lens and looking at, okay, what knowledge is, and knowledge is experience, knowledge is knowledge is knowing how to do things and practicing how to do things, but it's bigger than just knowing how and knowing what. Like, so if you start from a holistic version of knowledge, then that kind of guides your curriculum, that guides your way of working with people. It guides the conversations you have when you're walking even down over to the field with someone. Like, you're having a conversation with them, because you've got this mindset of that knowledge is a lot bit bigger than just knowing the fact. You wouldn't walk that to the field and start saying, what's the teaching point for this? What's the teaching point for that? You just wouldn't. You'd be like, what was you up to the weekend? Oh, I did this. Oh, what did you find? How did you get on? And then you start to, it's natural. It's a natural community practice to have these conversations. It's not natural to pigeonhole our conversations into 3 or 4 different technical points of doing things. But yeah, no, I agree with you in terms of where you start from will depend on how these things are. And sport, again, I love sport. Like, I have no qualms about teaching sport in PE. Like, even when, yeah, I agree when people say like PE is not sport. Actually, it is a lot of sport. It predominantly is. It's just the way it's dressed up. And there was a great project from a youth sport trust, and they had I think they did a pilot on like modifying all sorts of competitions and games, and there's some really good stuff from that. But I just feel like it's sitting in my Google Drive. Maybe it's sitting in someone else, and maybe it's in little pockets. But yeah, modifying games and bringing it down to suit the needs of the learner is a big thing for me, and that's where knowledge of the environment comes in. So, sorry, Greg, remind me of your question. Was it to do with where do we see it next?
I'm not sure there was a question, so I have to apologise.
But I think
so. Yeah, where's the work with Alex and Nathan going to go? If you're at liberty to say.
Yeah, so I think we're going to look at constraint-based approach and non-linear pedagogy as one way of potentially, because it's grounded in the ecological dynamics, which is looking about the system is the person and the environment. They're one and the same. There's no person and then I'm transmitting stuff to you and then you go and do this stuff in a vacuum. So you have to have that into your consideration. So even little things as simple as where you decide to have your lesson has a big impact. And a lot of the time schools are constrained by where they can have them, but actually some of the time they're not. Sometimes there is an opportunity to, no, actually I'm going to take them in this patch of grass over here, because this is going to be, the ball's going to bounce very different compared to this patch over here. Or I am going to take them to do basketball onto the concrete today, because that's going to be a little bit different than in the sports hall. So those little things there, people might think, oh, what's the point of doing it elsewhere? Well, just do everything in one space then. People don't do that. So you learn different things. There's different information in different areas. You learn different things, and some of those things I think can transfer to outside. So the big idea I had when I was head of PE, which didn't really go down well, was to take every student to the local park. And I spoke to you about this before, and do PE in a local park. So by the end of 5 years, you would have visited every park. Now that might be absolutely boring for some. I can't please everyone. But there may be 30-40% of students who had never been to these parks, didn't know they existed, even though they live in the local area. And I just had this vision of going to the park, because I visit my parks all the time. I have a dog and I have a son, and he's a bit of a guinea pig for me with exploring them. And I'm looking around and like, Ray, look how much we could do here. Like, we could have 40 kids doing loads of stuff in this space, but no one's there. And it's just me, my dog and Ray. And I'm like, if I was to walk through on a Saturday and see 30-40 of our boys who decided to come by themselves to engage in movement in a park in a space they didn't know was even there, I think that would be a really positive piece of knowledge to have. Knowledge of your environment, and not just knowledge of it, but knowledge of how to interact with it. Because sometimes you can put all the equipment out on your playground as you want, and kids look at it and they don't want to engage in it. So it's about that manipulating a little bit and trying to nudge and guide and co-create a little bit so people feel comfortable and actually find new ways to learn and to move. That's what I really am interested in. So if you've got a knowledge base already to start from, then I don't think you're going to find new ways to learn or move or experience, because you're actually trying to get them to go down a path so that you can assess them at the end. You've preempted and predetermined the understanding and the learning, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I love that. That's really some really fascinating stuff. And even if they're not going to the park, the notion of, I loved your example of taking basketball out of the sports hall, the gym, and taking it into the playground and, on tarmac. And, I don't have the figures to hand. I'm not sure anyone's got the figures to hand, but of the kids who are playing basketball, I wonder what the split is, how many playing on street courts, park courts, compared to organised, structured club basketball. I live near Finsbury Park in North London, and the 3 versus 3 courts, and the full-size courts, are vibrant, especially in this time of year in the summer. And it's a really great scene. And I'm thinking, I'm going back to relevance and relatability. If we're trying to prepare kids for where they're actually going to do this stuff, and I've been really increasingly interested over a number of years now in sensuous relevance. Like, what are the senses that are sparked that either get kids into activity or can often put kids off of activity? What does it feel like? It's an extension of really getting granular in that affective domain. What does it look like? What do I feel like? Am I cold? Am I happy? Am I damp? Is it raining? How do I cope with all of that? But if we're really frank as well, it's what you mentioned about contact, physical contact. What does that feel like to me as a 12-year-old, as a 15-year-old, especially when the other person's bigger or much taller on the basketball court? How do I deal with that? What does it smell like? That I think we really overlook those sort of questions, whether it's the environment that we're asking kids to get change in, or the sports hall, or the fresh air of the court, or the gravel and that noise and skiddy shoes and all of that sort of stuff. I think we absolutely skirt over it. I think you gave a really lovely example of how that really impacts on whether a kid is into it or whether we're putting them off.
Yeah, and I think that's key, Greg, because where the students or young people move, they're not going to come back in. Well, I said this to someone the other day, and they said they do climb over, but they're not going to climb back into school and start getting into the sports hall and playing basketball. And for me, what it does now, an ecological dynamics, non-linear pedagogy, constraints approach, I'm gravitate towards those areas, but not just because of the pedagogy, but because it's the way it's opened my mind. And it's opened my mind because if I have to take the environment into consideration, then I also have to take in the social culture aspect of things, not just the physical surfaces. So I know for a fact that when I was a kid, I wasn't going to leisure centre to rent and play basketball in a sports hall. That was never happening. And for a lot of kids, unless parents are taking them, and then you have to think about people's home lives, what have they got access to? What do you have access to that you can engage with by yourself without needing anyone to support you? And half of the things that we do in school need adult support. No, I would say more than half of the things, a lot of the things they do. So for me, we are preparing you in this vacuum, and we're saying, here you go out into there and go and engage in these things. I can't remember the last time I played badminton. I played badminton as an adult with my other half because we did it when we had no child and we had some time. But all of that stuff comes in as well. So when you get to university and you've got to work now and you got whatever situation at home, what can you actually engage with to be physically fit? That's not going to cost you any money. That's going to be, you're going to feel comfortable. And I just feel we've got so many things around us that are free, they're accessible, that as a minimum, I don't think you've got any harm in trying to educate someone's attention towards the knowledge of the environment around them that's immediately available. And again, environment is, and this is the key point, it's not just about where they are, but it's actually that how it feels to be in that space. And if you're not in that space for a period of time, then you won't feel comfortable in it. And I think that's the way I feel anyway.
Yeah, that's That's absolutely fascinating, and it goes back to a really big question about education and the purpose of education at a really macro level. Are we educating kids to function and to thrive and to flourish within their local communities? Or are we preparing them, or are we trying to extend them into other spheres of knowledge and experiences, and whose spheres are they and who's shaping that agenda? I just recently, earlier this year, enjoyed a wonderful book called The Tyranny of Meritocracy by Michael Sandel, and he talks about the how prominent and prevalent and powerful what he refers to as the ideology of escapism is. So if I put some real flesh on those bones, if you take someone like Raheem Sterling, he's lauded because he escaped the hardship of his upbringing and his community. And Michael Sandel asked the question, why does someone have to be successful to escape? Why can't the attention be, why should anyone have to escape any community who's growing up in the G7 or G8 countries? So there's a huge sort of political question there and economic question there. Why have we got quote unquote left behind communities and areas, which is, he says, is an abomination of political decision making? So if you extend that to PE, I think dance is a really good example. Do we teach kids to dance as they're likely to move? I must admit, I'm a little bit torn here, because I do see wonder and brilliance in teaching kids different stuff that they might not be familiar with. The best dance teacher I ever worked alongside took kids into really uncomfortable spaces in contemporary dance, into ballet, and these were inner urban London kids, and they absolutely flew. So I'm not sure I've got the answers, but I certainly got the questions there. And just to wrap up, after another rambling, because I've noticed you've been, and I think it's really related actually. You were talking about the social context and loads. Well, you could probably draw the dots together, but you've been tweeting or referring to a movement called Blacks Can't Swim. So just for people who are not familiar with it, just share what you understand it to be and what's your relationship with it. Are you involved with it? So if you wouldn't mind just wrapping up and talking about that.
Yeah, it's probably best that you streamline me as well, actually, and put me in, because otherwise it end up going on for another 10 hours. But yeah, Blacks Can't Swim. So I wrote a blog about a year ago. So again, through Big Education, I was connected to Hannah Wilson, diverse educators, and they're a great organisation because they just want to amplify voices. So yeah, I wrote a blog on race in PE, and I was kind of looking around for some stuff for the blog, and I found this film called Blacks Can't Swim. It was on YouTube. So Ed Okura is the producer, and it was interesting. It was like his story I could resonate with, because I learned to swim as an adult, and I only learned to swim because my old supervisor at Kingston said, you better learn to swim if you're going to be a PE teacher. So I was like, okay, I better learn. And then you start thinking about why didn't I learn to swim? But anyway, so yeah, he reached out to me on Twitter and said, oh, I'm going to do another project. I'm going to do a third one. So there's 2 films at the moment, and the third one, which is Blacks Can't Swim, was out yesterday for streaming yesterday. So 4th of July, go and have a watch. It's on Amazon. It's an amazing film, but the films are made to change the narrative, to have the conversation, to put the conversation into the right people's hands, but everyone's hands really, because everyone's got a role to play in how they can do it, especially PE teachers, but policymakers as well. So yeah, he made the 3rd film. I'm in the film, so I'm part of it. So it's a story which follows 2 young people, 2 different stories. I won't put any spoilers, but it follows their journey of swimming. And I am one of the interviewees who dips in and out with some bits of rambling about why we should look at swimming and why it's such a life skill and such a valued life skill. because I think Sport England has some facts about 95% of black people don't swim, and 80% of Asian people, South Asian people, don't swim. So, and I know there's a bigger narrative around swimming in terms of primary. It's not just to do with black people, but I know that swimming is a kind of elephant in the room. Like, it's not being taught. It's not being till I know it is being taught, but it's not being supported. It's not being something that's seen as important until we get all these figures around drowning and so forth. So I'm really passionate about it. I have a personal connection to it because swimming for me was a barrier, something that I'm still learning to do now. I'm not a confident swimmer. And I also know there's a lot of people who would benefit from, like you said, with the dance, feeling uncomfortable for a while, but actually would really, really benefit and add something to their lives. And that's what really breaks my heart when I see, and I don't mean to bring the Austin review up again, but it said something really silly like students were taught the wrong way to swim. They were taught to swim with their head in the water for breaststroke. That's absolutely the right way if you're a professional swimmer. If you're swimming with your mum on holiday, the worst thing you want to do is have your head in the water. You can't even talk. So people don't swim just to be athletes, to train. People swim because it's a leisurely activity, it's a social activity. And if we're going to say that, yeah, you need this knowledge of swimming, the breaststroke where you're facing the water, and then you're going to be better at physically active, actually, that's going to be a really antisocial and put people off.
I love that. I love that social swimming. Yeah, it's so overlooked, isn't it? It is the most presented as the most non-social activity. You can't hear anything. Often you can't see anything. So yeah, all of those barriers. What a great start for a course of work on swimming would be just paddle up and down the pool, have a chat with your mate. Wouldn't that be lovely?
But that takes skill and technique, and like Justin O'Connor's and Laura Alfie, they've done that paper about reconsidering the tactical side of things. That takes real skill to talk, to basically just keep your pace and keep your cadence the same, so that you can engage in a conversation with someone.
Absolutely. And if it gets a bit much, just pull over to the side and stand at the wall for 5 minutes and be that person that everyone's like, oh, get out of the way, I've got to do my turn here, I'm coming in for the time, get out of the way,
trying to go as fast as way to get away from people, but
yeah, we'd have to do that, Mo. We'd have to rewrite a relevant scheme of work for swimming. I think that'd be a lot of fun.
Going back to that, Greg, sorry, the blacks can't swim. In all seriousness, it's about education, and it's about having people in the room who really understand the culture. A really interesting story from Daniel Obi. So she's one of the co-founders of the Black Swimming Association, along with Alice Deering, the Team GB swimmer, and Ed Okura. And she told a story about culture and about how the poor family that drowned, they may have been on holiday, and it's not in their culture to bury their children. But the officials, obviously, well, not obviously, there's no one in the culture who knows that culture. So they're adding more grief to this family because here's the body and you need to do this, you need to do that. And they're using their policies and procedures. But actually, that's not culturally relevant to that family. So instead of helping, they're actually adding more grief because they don't understand. They don't have the knowledge of the people that they're dealing with. They only have a knowledge base, which is, oh yeah, of course I'm going to bury my child. Why wouldn't I bury my child? But actually, in that culture, it's not something. So I'm hoping I've got that story right and I'm not offended. But that really struck a chord to me. Is the education is not just about facts and figures and propositional statements. It's actually more than that. It's a lot more deep rooted than that.
Yeah, and on obviously on a less tragic level, although possibly with just as severe long-term implications for more and more people. The whole conversation around where we started, where you started, PE for whom, owned by whom, for what purpose, doing what unto the children, and what the long-term impact of their engagement and ability, willingness, motivation, enthusiasm to engage in things that should make their lives better, that make all too few people's lives better. So I think that cultural relevance is possibly a big conversation that we might pick up on another time. But
Yeah.
I will definitely put in the notes, I'll put the links to the Blacks Can't Swim films, as well as signpost to your link. So I'll put your Twitter link. Is there anything else that I should put in there if people want to contact you?
No, Twitter link's fine. I'm happy to contact by email as well. I've got my probably best to do my personal email, so mojafar23@gmail.com. Like, you can tell I can talk this stuff forever. I will be talking it forever. It's not just PE for me. It's not just a subject. Like, I live and breathe it. I love it. I'm just constantly thinking and talking about it. So yeah, happy to talk to anyone, and thanks, Greg, for having me to chat. Hopefully you got something out of today.
Well, I thoroughly enjoyed it. I really enjoyed it, and you know, that really comes through. That, you know, it's not just something you go to work to teach, and this notion of living and breathing it is really evident, and makes the conversation really interesting and exciting for me to engage with, and hopefully people will pick up on that. So Mo, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate your contribution and your effort and your willingness to engage in this stuff. So thank you very much.
No worries. Thanks, Greg. Cheers, mate.